All right. Welcome back, everybody. Happy Friday, and welcome to another edition of the Future Focused Weekly Update with the stated goal of keeping you 10 steps ahead of the intersection of business, technology, and human experience. Thanks to all of you who listen, follow, and always appreciate the notes and the messages and some of the articles that you share with me. Keep those coming. And if you find this helpful and you have not already, or if you're new to it and you find it helpful, please share this with someone you know, or also go out and give it a review. It always helps people find it. So I'm always trying to make sure I ask for help where needed, which does not come easy for me. All right, so I've got a number of topics this week that I want to dig into that I think were pretty interesting. I think you'll find them helpful. I'll try and shoot through them as quickly as possible while still hitting on the main points. And so I've got 5 on the list. We'll see how far we get through each one of them. But let's first kick off with probably one of the biggest. I don't know if it's actually the biggest, but there's been a lot of hype around Apple and AI and where are they going with it, and a lot of anticipation and hype for what was coming this week at their big event. And they went through and they announced what some of the changes are and what's coming for it. And so AI is a big deal. Apple Intelligence, as it's being called, is coming to iPhones everywhere in the new release. It's not coming to every device. So if you're not somebody who has the latest, but it is coming to all the devices with M1 processors and above, and it'll be on OS 18 with, and again, not every Apple iPhone. So who knows, maybe there's a way to boost their iPhone sales too, because I know I saw it and was like, well, you know what, I'm several models behind, so maybe this will push me to get the new one. But so they're enhancing it. But what was interesting as I broke down and actually listened to and watched all the different functionality, I think there was a lot of hype and people going, this is it. This is the AI assistant, the full-blown, fully functioning, autonomous AI bot in your hand, available for you at any point in time. And if that's what you were expecting, let me just say, I think you will be very disappointed. I kind of watched as they went through it, and just based on some of the hype, and at the end, as I'm watching, I kind of sat in my storm. If you're watching the video, you can see my AR effects. It was kind of like, oh, okay, that's what you're doing. Which, to be fair, in some ways, it is a pretty sizable, and I'll break down why it's actually a pretty significant advancement. But it also doesn't come as a surprise for me coming from Apple. So Apple oftentimes tends to be a little more conservative with some of the stuff that they do. They're not necessarily going to put themselves way out there, especially with something as volatile as AI. So it doesn't surprise me that AI wouldn't want to go full blown in on an AI assistant, especially given some of the debacles we've seen with Google adding Reddit and search engines and some of these things where AI is creating fake articles and all this other stuff that's happening left and right. And so it's not surprising that Apple went, we're not going to necessarily go full in on this thing. I think the other thing that many people who aren't closer to the tech may overlook is the fact it's doing some of this AI processing on device is actually really impressive. So, and there's no shortage of challenges to taking. People just don't always recognize how much horsepower it takes to run some of this generative AI stuff. And to be able to do it on device is impressive. Like when you're using a usual interface and you're doing this, you're actually bouncing off their processing centers and their servers and all this other stuff, and you're just kind of interacting through your browser. It's not actually wreaking havoc on your processor, on your computer. So to actually bring some of that in-house, to me, this is laying the groundwork for what's to come. So if you don't have your mind blown by what it can do, I was right there with you, but I think there's more than meets the eye. And I think this is Apple taking some conservative, cautious, and in some ways, I think this is good. We've all been saying, hey, can we slow down on the AI advancement? I think that's exactly what Apple's doing, going, we're not going to just go headfirst into this and risk completely blowing this thing up and damaging our brand, our reputation. We're going to step in slowly, introduce it in ways that I think people will be able to adopt in tangible, meaningful ways. And then we'll slowly layer this on as we figure out more of the processing on device challenges that we have because integrating hardware and software is no simple step. And then, as we move up the adoption curve and more of the masses are there, I mean, you really got to take into account Apple has a massive, massive footprint in terms of who uses Apple devices. And so for them to just take a wild risk on something, I actually, as I processed it more, I respect where they landed on it. So while at first I was disappointed and going, really? I was hoping to be able to do more with my iPhone after this release than what you launched. But I get it and I actually respect it. And I think there's actually some real wisdom behind this. Now you may be sitting there going, so get on with it. What can we start to expect? Couple things that I'll just hit on. I'm not going to get into all of the details. You can go watch a video specifically breaking down all the features and functionalities. And actually, some of the stuff, a lot of the experts who are even closer to it are like, until we actually see it released, I'm not getting too excited even about what they're announcing, because how it looks on a slide or how it looks in a presentation or in a perfectly conditioned environment is very different than in practice. So some of the ones that were interesting, as you can imagine, we're going to see more summaries and AI prioritization. So you're going to see more AI prioritizing your notifications. There was a kind of a cool feature on email where it could summarize your email real quick and just tell you at a glance what each email has, all being done with its little AI assistant, Apple Intelligence. There's a little logo that you can tell when it's an AI intelligence decision or an Apple Intelligence decision. So basic functionality like that. There were some things where it could do, rewrite this email, stuff like that, that again, not mind blowing, not something you couldn't do somewhere else, but it's just embedded directly on the device and it's running off the device's processing power. So instead of bouncing out to another site and having to wait on that, which some people might go, well, that doesn't help me. I have ChatGPT on my phone. Why would I just copy and paste? It simplifies a step. Is your mind blown? Not necessarily. I thought the Apple actions were somewhat interesting where, you have a little more opportunity to voice command your phone to do more than you may, set an alarm at this time, and it can connect some basic dots between a couple apps. It was not, if you listen to my last one or a couple ones ago, I was like, will Apple's AI have the ability to fully know and interact with all of our apps? And can we just tell it to do whatever on anything on our phone and do that? No, it won't. Apple Intents, like INTENTS, that's being open to devs. One of the challenges that I think Apple has on even that capability that I'm talking about of, could you ask your phone to do this and it works across apps? One of the things that you have a challenge in that is the devs actually own their apps. And so they actually have to be the ones to open their app up to that and actually design for that. So they did create the foundational framework through Apple Intents that now app designers can start to build their apps optimized for AI utilization, for Apple Intelligence. But this is a slow moving process. So as I understood the features, the functionality, Apple Actions is specific to Apple apps, things like that it can do automatically. Apple Intents is designed to be able to, allow developers to start optimizing their apps for this. So as new Apple developers or Apple app developers start getting on this train, I think we're going to start to see more of that, more of the cross app collaboration. Apple Actions was really pretty basic, 1-2 steps, not advanced. You can ask it to do a whole bunch of things and it'll just take care of it for you, which the way it was being hyped, it definitely didn't meet my I was like, oh, okay. I mean, a little bit better than Siri. Siri's enhanced based on a pretty comprehensive database of everything you can do on your iPhone. So if you need any assistance on like, how would I do this with my iPhone? It can do that, but that's a pretty basic, it's trained on a very specific set of information and it's voice assistant type of a thing. So not radically different, but again, basic changes to that. So that was fine. Siri is slightly enhanced, through voice actions to be able to tap into Apple Actions, into some of these, like asking it how to do certain things on your phone. And it can create a quick, job aid basically for you, hey, I'm trying to do this. How would I do it? And it'll give you the instructions and walk you through it. So that was okay, fine. One of the things that I thought was pretty interesting, given the on device capability, they actually had integrated nothing mind blowing for anybody who's done image generation with some of these Gen AI models, but they actually have some on device image generation capability, primarily in Genmoji, where you can have it create your own emojis. So if you want an emoji that obviously isn't in the library, you can just have it generate its own. There were some pretty cute, funny, ways people were using that. You can have it take, basically your avatar that you use as your image and have it created in different environments in text engines. And, again, it can create little cute, funny images to go along to personalize. And I think this is where we're starting to see Apple getting into the basics of, hey, how can we use generative AI, advanced AI in basic ways where people are already doing these things, but maybe they're getting stuck or frustrated. You can't quite find the right image you want to send in your text chat group, or the emoji you really want to send doesn't exist. Well, let's use AI so people can start getting creative with that. I thought another one that was a little bit interesting was, it does some of that automated video creation where, it'll do your memories. Now you can actually direct it like, hey, make a video of these things, and it can go through all your videos and all your images and put together a video. Now, how good it works, we'll see in practice. But the fact that's all being done on demand on your device, it's pretty impressive. And the fact that even with videos, it's now transcribing and actually breaking down, it's actually analyzing even the images in your video. So if you want to find a specific moment in something if you're like my wife, you've got thousands and thousands of pictures and videos and you're trying to find it, you can just describe it in natural language and it will find it. In which I thought the search capability was already pretty good, but it stepped it up. So all that to say, you can go see a checklist of every single enhancement. I think the on-device image gen capability is pretty impressive to be able to. The fact we've moved to that point on device with just a basic mobile processor is pretty impressive. I think the Apple intents and Apple actions over time, we'll start to see them to be pretty powerful. The one thing that I think a lot of people were waiting for, because ChatGPT and OpenAI had inked this deal, I think there was a lot more expectation on what Siri would be able to do and the capability to essentially basically have this AI assistant on demand at all times that's as comprehensive as ChatGPT. It doesn't work quite that way. They showed it, and essentially, if you're trying to do something more advanced than what the really basic on device model, it'll say, do you want to connect to ChatGPT? And whether that just opens the app, whether it's directly connecting to it, I haven't seen the interface yet, but was not, Siri on steroids. Or Siri in the Marvel series suddenly becomes a superhero, get bit by a radioactive spider, anything like that. So needless to say, I wasn't blown away. And actually, now that I think about that, please don't. If you're a Marvel or DC person, if I said that wrong, don't send me an email. I know I have some Marvel fans. Anyway, don't expect to have your mind blown. But I think what it is doing is laying the foundation in a conservative, practical way that we'll start to see, especially with things like Apple Intents, where people will start to be able to build apps. We'll start to see more of this advanced capability. It will start to pull some of the load off these massive data centers and put it directly on the device. I don't know how that's going to affect the battery power and processing, speeds, things like that, but it will be interesting. But again, if you were thinking you're going to have AGI on your phone, you're going to be disappointed. I'll just end on that note. But again, I think under the surface, there's a lot more infrastructure and baseline technology being built in that is actually far more impressive than we realize. And some of it is just the AI space has moved so fast, things that maybe 2 years ago would have just blown our minds. We're so used to it now, seeing it come to an iPhone. We're like, it can make an emoji? Like, that's it? But when you really think about what that takes and the fact it's doing it on device, it's pretty impressive. So all that to say, more to come on that. But yeah, don't temper your expectations if you were if you were really excited and haven't had a chance to check it out. All right, on to topic number 2. somebody shared this with me last week and said, what are your thoughts on this? So the Zoom CEO, there's this whole article on, I think, The Verge, and it was talking about the Zoom CEO and how he's really pushing to have AI agents essentially be able to attend meetings on his behalf so that he doesn't have to be everywhere at once, and then he can just kind of digest and whatever, and not have to consume all this stuff. And I've actually been in a number of conversations where this has come up in the business world, where there's one concern from people that people are going to start, because people are starting to ask, hey, can we just have AI be at the meeting to take notes and record and do all this stuff? And then can you just send the stuff out afterwards? And then I don't have to attend, type of a thing. So it's becoming a growing challenge in corporate America and in environments where there's a lot of meetings happening. And so the fact that Zoom CEO is actually outspoken about it and kind of proponing for this, saying we should just do this. This should just be the way we work. We just send AI to all these meetings that we can't attend. I have two big issues with this kind of thinking. I understand where it comes from, but I think it's one of the things where we fail to think about, are we really solving the problem, or are we just sticking a hole in the Hoover Dam crack going, let's just plug this hole and maybe this will help? So the first part of this is, first of all, there's this idea, and honestly, this hustle culture that we live in, especially in the West, where it's just like, do more, push harder. The more meetings we attend, the more hours we spend at work, the more efficient we become. Like, let's not slow down. Let's just find ways to run faster, more efficiently. I don't think it's helpful, to be completely honest. We are not wired this way. I've seen human behavior in diminishing returns. It just doesn't, people are not designed to run 24/7 and be in 10 places at once trying to do all this and then catch up later. Even if you think it's helping you in the short term, where you're like, well, I was able to attend 5 meetings at the same time while only technically attending one, but then digesting all the information and just getting the talking points later, you're still cognitively overloading yourself. You're still overstimulating yourself with vastly more information than you can humanly process and deal with. And as a result, whether you think it or not, you are draining your battery, and you're draining it at a faster pace. And cognitively, mentally, emotionally, you're straining yourself. And so this idea that let's just throw AI out and we can do all this other stuff, it'll just help us, I actually think it's going to cause more harm in the end. So while he's a big advocate, I'm hearing more and more people talk about how we'll be able to do more with less and do all these other things. I think there's some room for it. I think there are times and places where we can apply this with discernment and wisdom and say, yeah, you know what? I need to know the details of some of this. And so as an example, there are times where I can't attend a meeting, just practically speaking from my end. I can't attend a meeting because maybe that meeting is not the most important meeting that I need to be at. But there is a key decision that's coming out of that meeting. And because of my role, people need me to weigh in on that. So I at least need to be briefed on that and know enough details to make a decision. There are times where it is helpful to have AI, give me the meeting notes, the biggest talking points type of thing. But here's the caution. And here's something that I'm very intentional about that I think we need to be really careful of. Even in those situations, I'm always following up with people to get the real scoop on what's going on and what are the things that weren't said at the meeting, or what were the reactions that happened after the meeting that weren't captured in the meeting that I need to understand to be able to make a wise decision. So while the AI assistant may help me get the gist of, okay, these were the main points for this, or this is the cost, or these are the challenges we're trying to solve, that's fine. AI can help me with that. But it doesn't, I would never just make a decision based on AI meeting notes, because there's so much more going on the human level that doesn't happen or isn't spoken or happens later after the fact that doesn't get captured in that. And so I feel like in some ways I see what he's getting at, but I get really concerned when I hear people talk about this stuff where it's like, great, I can be at 10 places at once and then just get the Reader's Digest and then operate as if I was actually at those 10 meetings. you weren't. So while it may help you in some areas, you're still going to have to do the hard work to close the gaps on that. So that's one of the bigger concerns that I have around some of this other stuff. The other big issue that I have with this, where it's like, can't we just send AI to meetings and do all this stuff? Is I just go, why are we not asking the question? If you can send an AI agent that just summarizes the meeting for you, why are you having a meeting in the first place? And nobody seems to ever want to have that discussion of, why do we have so many stupid meetings that could have been solved with an email? Why are we consuming people's live time when we could have sent them the 5 things that we just needed to make sure they're aware of and call it a day, and not waste people's precious time that is already stretched too thin? And so this idea this just moves to this idea of like, oh, pretty soon we're going to have AI agents going to meetings, and then they're going to make decisions, and then they're just going to come back to us with the decisions. And it's like, how about we just be more intentional and purposeful with the way we spend our time? And I feel like oftentimes meetings, it's a lazy approach. You're going, well, I don't want to take the time to structure my thoughts and do all this stuff, and I don't really want to go to the effort of that. So I'll just throw a meeting on the calendar where I can just blah and then run through it. And if that's the case, then freaking record yourself saying what you need to say, run it through AI, and send everybody the summary. If you're like, well, I don't have time to break it down, then let AI do it for you, but don't waste everybody else's time pulling them together. I just continue to get frustrated sometimes with this because I see how much time gets wasted in meetings, and just live time for people is probably one of the most precious things that you can ask from them. Saying, I need your undivided attention from this period to this period, and this is when it has to happen. I don't think people actually respect how much of an ask that actually is. And in my book, if you're going to request people to engage with you at a specific period of time where they've got to adjust their schedules to make that time work, there better be some real purpose behind it. And if truly it could be solved with an AI agent that can just transcribe and send a summary of it, you didn't need it to be a meeting in the first place. You could have solved it through a better channel. And so when it comes to things like this, I would actually go head to head with some of these folks who are like, we should just have AI agents attending all our meetings. No, we just should have less meetings and have AI summarizing what we need from people, so that when we get together, we're only focusing on the most relevant components that actually require us to be together at the same time, talking through these things. And it's just, again, work is changing people's comfort level with some of this. And so this is one of those instances that I think everybody, whether it's meetings or other areas, that I think people just need to be careful that we can look to find solutions to problems that mitigate problems instead of actually solving the problem. And this is a perfect example of, rather than trying to find AI agents to go to your meetings for you, focus on how do you have less meetings that are a waste of your time. And that would be my advice to folks on that one. All right. So next up, there was another, man, you want to talk, I feel like OpenAI has more drama than a daytime soap opera. But they had another leader leave, and he was a whistleblower. I put in quotes because sometimes I'm always very skeptical of whistleblowers, and it's one of these like, what are you really doing? What are you really trying to accomplish with this? What are your motives behind it? But anyway, the point is, this individual went out and basically published a whole bunch of stuff on kind of where things with AI are, where they're going, some of the things that people may not necessarily realize. And if you want, you can go to situational-awareness.ai and actually download this thing. It's a huge PDF. If you're not a complete geek in the tech sphere, you're probably not going to enjoy it. But if you are someone who likes to read the source content and actually dig into some of this stuff, it's a pretty interesting paper that they put together, and it's well done. And it describes kind of the journey we've been on and where things are going and some of the predictions to where we'll be. And his perspective is we'll be at AGI by 2027, ASI by 2030 or something like that. And he makes a pretty compelling case for why. So I wanted to talk about this because it is interesting looking at some of these things because when we're swimming in the fishbowl of the tech transformation age that we're in right now, it can be very easy to end up on two ends of the spectrum. One end of the spectrum is, oh my gosh, technology is, moving so fast. We're going to be taken over by our robot overlords in the next 5 years. Or you can be on the other end and you watch the AI Apple Intelligence release and you go, with all this technological advancement, like we've got AI making emojis for us and we're worried about what AI is going to do to us in the future. And I don't think either of them are terribly helpful. But if you actually pay attention to where we've been and where we're going, I think anybody who's on the spectrum of kind of rolling their eyes and sneering at what the potential of AI is and what it could do, you do need to take it a little bit more seriously. And even though you may see things like Apple where they're being more conservative and slow to move in this, there are some really impressive things happening that I think these next 3 to 5 years, they're going to be exceptionally disrupting. Now, I'm going to talk about some of the barriers that we have to overcome and what the implications of those might be. But it is interesting to look at some of this stuff. So a couple of the things, I took a couple screenshots. So if you're not watching, you can go to YouTube and find these in the timestamps. But if you look at it, I mean, it's amazing when you actually take a minute to pause on where we are and how far we've come in a very short period of time. So just as an example, the article went into details on this base compute and how computing power has these exponential differences. And so while it may seem like, well, we're really not moving that fast, when you actually compare, hey, these growth trajectories, they're not linear. So us improving in these things, the order of magnitude just continues going up and up. Sorry, now I have Vector from Despicable Me stuck in my head. Anyway, fighting crime with both direction and magnitude. Oh yeah, sorry. Anyway, but it's one of these things where this stuff is changing exponentially. And so while you may look at things now and go, yeah, I mean, it's making emojis. Like, what's the big deal? But when 6 months later, the compute power has gone 4x, and just the image I have on the screen, you can see this. So base compute, you look at that image and you're like, what the heck is that thing? And then you look at the 4x and you go, wow, like now we're like borderline photorealistic, still a little blurry, still doesn't look quite real, to 32x. And you go, that looks like a picture that I could have taken on my iPhone with how accurate and photorealistic it is. You start to realize, oh, if we're here and we may only be able to get to here, it's not this flat line moving up. It's a pretty significant exponential jump. And so to the folks who look at where things are, or you go out and you use ChatGPT and you go, see it, I stumped it with this. It's still so stupid. It can't logically reason through some of these things. It's like, no, maybe not right now, but compare it to where it was a year ago. And you'll go, oh, we haven't just moved up in the order of magnitude through this linear approach. It's going up exponentially. And this image generation really, I think, highlights that. I think the other one that was really helpful in this, and this is where we start to get into, okay, it has been a relatively, even though, and this is maybe the concerning part, this one, I will tell you, if you look at the intelligence explosion, I think this one might be a little bit coming from the camp of the people who think the robot overlords are going to take us over here in 2030. And so I don't necessarily fully adhere to where they're going with this. But what I do agree with some of the logic that how they're thinking about this. And so if you look at this grid, you can see that 2022 and 2018, well, really deep learning really kind of started moving heavily in 2017, 2018, and then moving forward. And you can see we've been on a relatively linear path up to GPT-4. And yes, it's been growing, and it's been growing at a pretty steep pace, but it's been relatively linear. And now for some of you who are thinking about this, you might be like, this is what linear feels like? Holy cow, it feels like an explosion. It is, but it's been relatively linear. What I think we need to prepare for, and this is the part where it's going to be really interesting as you look at that bend in the curve, is as these models hit a certain point, we're going to start to see even more exponential capability in terms of what it can do. And we even see some of this. I look at some of the benchmarks around, its reasoning process on some of these big tests and things like that. And where just maybe even 6 months ago, it was barely passing to now it's passing in the 90th percentile type of a thing. And if you really understand what goes into that, that is a massive advance in this. And so when you start to think about as these models further advance, really what this article started to talk about was it's not there yet, and GPT-4 is running about the intelligence of a smart high schooler. With the next order of magnitude that we're probably going to cross here in the relatively near future, 26 to 28, depending on who you talk to. Some people are saying it's going to be a few years, some are saying 5 to 7, but if our benchmarks are right, things seem to keep moving up. Is when it gets to a certain point where it can start to reason and think, even like a PhD or graduate level person, what they're really going to start to be able to do with it is they can start to then use these models to actually advance the research. And so the AI can begin doing further research and reasoning through some of the challenges it's even getting stuck on its own. And then it can find exponential gains from there. And so when you looked at that image I had, that's where you really see it start jumping up. And so while we've seen this kind of linear, because it's largely been humans advancing and finding some of these things, and AI is starting to play a role, but still very heavily guided. As we move to a level where AI can become a little bit more autonomous, a lot of where this AI research is going to go is they're going to be using AI to do further AI research, which, given how fast and capable it can be, if we get the models to a level of intelligence where it can do this, suddenly it can start advancing the AI and solving the AI problems that we're seeing on its own, which then just allows it to jump significantly. Now, whether this is accurate or not is still to be seen. And I see people on all ends of the spectrum who go, some people say this absolutely. In fact, I think we're going to see this even sooner. Others go, not a chance. There's just no way. We've got a long ways to go. AI is still extremely broken, and we've got a ways to go before we're actually going to be able to see it performing at these kind of levels because of XYZ limitations. I don't really know, but in terms of the logic of once we can get to this threshold, do I agree that I think we're going to see even more exponential growth? Yes. And the linear, which still feels like a very steep climb that we're climbing right now, will only get steeper and steeper and steeper before it starts to level off. So, what does that mean? I mean, for the most part, I think for a lot of people, it's just we need to stay conscious about what this stuff is. And like I said last week, we all have a choice in terms of how involved and how integrated we're going and how dependent we're going to become on some of this stuff. I think the technology will always be wildly ahead. Its capabilities will be wildly ahead of where we are societally in terms of adoption and things like that. So even if we get to a point where AI just explodes into AGI, ASI in the next few years, if that even happens, I think it's going to be a bit before we start to see that making its way into the day-to-day of things, but we have a little bit more control over that. So it's interesting. It was interesting going through this whole thing. I think there are definitely no shortage of barriers that we're going to have to work through to get to this point, but time will tell. Now, in terms of one of the barriers, I'm going to transition to this one because this one is interesting to say the least. So what was interesting about this was I read an article on futurism that was talking about the brick wall AI is about to hit. And so you might say, well, which brick wall? The power brick wall, the human capacity brick wall, the financial brick wall, the blah, blah, blah. Which one? The one this one was talking about was the data brick wall. And as I did a little bit more research into some of this, this is a real challenge that AI developers and AI companies are starting to have to wrap their arms around, which is, it'll blow your mind on this, but AI is getting to a point where it has literally almost consumed everything in existence that it could possibly be trained on. So everything that it could possibly have access to, it's getting to a point where it's like, uh-oh, we don't really have any more publicly available data in all of the internet to train it on because it moves that fast that it's been able to process, consume, you know, figure out what to do with it and actually pull all that into it. And so now there's this question of, well, shoot, what happens when there's no new data for it to consume? Because again, it takes time for people to create new data. It takes time for us to do new research to train the AI on, us to create new content that AI can learn from. So what do we do with that? Now, looking through some of the solutions to this, some people are like, well, it's fine. We'll just use AI to create more data, which AI generated data is absolutely a thing. I know a lot of companies that are doing a lot of training around AI, using AI generated data. Some of it is just for privacy and security. Some of it is just for this very reason. There's just a limited amount of data, so they can use AI to generate more data. But the question that it raises is, while you may be able to generate more AI generated data to fill the hole of AI data, you start to have diminishing returns in terms of its ability to make AI more intelligent and more powerful, because it's like a snake starting to eat its own tail. It's like, well, you're just feeding it the same thing. And so it's not necessarily learning anything new. It's just going back over the same stuff. And so there's a lot of people talking about the fact that, are we going to see basically a big stone wall where we go, this is it? Like, this is about as advanced as we can get. Now, I think going back to the previous point on growth trajectory, I think there's a lot of inefficiencies in the way the models are trained today. There's a lot of logical challenges that they have not figured out how to overcome yet. There are things like that that they still have to work through, that I think that we're still going to see some of this exponential growth, or steep growth, for some time. So I think to the folks who are more on the doomsday, like, this is it, GPT as you see it today is the smartest it will ever be. I watched a thing with Sam Altman last night where he was very candid about the fact that GPT-4 is the dumbest version of AI that you will ever have to work with again. And so he's in the know on some of this stuff, where I don't think we're suddenly going to see us just flatten out with 4.0, which is really an omni AI model. I think we're going to see some continued advancement in this, which, for those of you who follow the tech and are curious where things go, it's going to be interesting to watch. I mean, these next few years, I'm waiting to see some pretty significant breakthroughs in, image video generation. I actually have it listed out. I didn't do it for this video. I might do it next week or the week after. I've been following some of the biggest predictions and trends, and I'm going to just kind of break down my thoughts on each of these. So I won't do it here, but I think based on some of these limitations that we see, I've got some thoughts on whether we're going to actually get to some of these milestones in the coming years or not. But I don't know that the brick wall is as much of a doomsday for AI as the Futurism article represented, because basically the way it presented it was, where we are right now, this is about it, because we're out of the data to train it on. And I think we've got a lot more that we can squeeze out of what we have today, even without new data per se. I think there's other efficiencies that can be gained that are going to continue this growth in terms of what we're able to do with it and all that. But I guess we'll see. All right. So the last one was a concept that came out of a conversation that happened between Sam Altman and someone else. And it was really interesting. A few weeks ago, I was talking about how a lot of these AI companies are pushing for the idea of universal basic income. As AI starts taking over more things, we need to make sure that we don't leave people too far in the dust. And one of the things that came up recently that I've been starting to just more explore the possibilities of, and how could this actually work, is this idea of universal basic compute, which is completely different than universal basic income. And the whole premise of this concept is the idea that AI is going to get to a point where our whole economic structure is going to change, and where money is no longer even relevant anymore. And really, it's our computing power and how much compute power are you allocated that will actually determine what you are or able or aren't able to do. And so rather than purchase goods with money, you would purchase goods with compute power, because essentially you're feeding the machine. It's like a vending machine. You feed it, your compute power, and then it does whatever you need it to. And it's all based off this idea that really the machines are doing the vast majority of stuff. It's an interesting concept. And I actually would be curious to hear from folks, your thoughts on some of this stuff. I actually don't think it's that insane. I think what concerns me about some of this stuff, as I've looked into some of the universal basic compute stuff, is here's my biggest concerns. Well, before I get to the concerns, here's some of the reasons why I actually don't think it's that insane. Is that really what we're talking about? Is we're just talking about changing currency. So currency would move from a dollar to so many tokens or whatever, which really we've done this through human history many times. We used to have the gold standard, and then we really didn't even have gold. It was based on different stuff. So really all we'd be talking about is moving to a new economic model. Now, I think there's some challenges to that. We've got governments in place that run off of all of this. And so compute is owned by privately held companies. So I think we've got a long ways to go. So if you're thinking like, hey, where do I buy compute and kind of like cryptocurrency, and just kind of sit on that for a while in hopes that my whatever number of tokens are somehow worth an infinite amount of resources in the future. I think we've got a long ways to go before this, but I'm actually interested to watch how this one starts to play out and where we go with some of this stuff, because I do think it's realistic that we might start to see our economic structure start to shift if in fact AI does make these order of magnitude jumps that actually does allow AI to be doing a lot more things that really changes our whole economic structure. So I don't know exactly, where, and I think we've got a lot of roadblocks just based on how our economy's set up today and all of this. Here's my concerns with it though, and the things that I think we need to watch out for. And again, the role you play in it, I don't think fear is helping anybody. So it's not so much hear this and panic and think you need to build a bunker with your dollars before they're not worth anything. I think we've got a long ways before we'd have to worry about something like that. But I think some of the things that we can be mindful of is like paying attention to this kind of stuff, because if this shift does start to happen, the way we value things will change. And as a result, there are going to be people who hold tightly to, potentially an old economic structure. And before they know it, what they think is valuable suddenly has no more value, and they miss the boat. And I think that's a real risk, is if we start to move towards this kind of system, there are people who just out of their own stubbornness will be, oops, that thumbs up was not intended for this, that will be left behind by it. Now, like I said, I think we've got a long ways to go, but I'm going to be following this to see, am I starting to see some of the indications, some of the indicators that we're moving? And I plan on having some of my economist friends back on the show to talk through how they think something like this would actually play out and what that shift would look like, so we can keep a pulse on it. But I think some of my biggest concerns with it is so first of all, one, who owns that power? And one of the things that I think is really uncomfortable right now is there are a handful of people who hold all this. And again, it's privately held, so there's not a lot of governance regulations into any of this. And so for them to hold that amount of power, if we were to move our economic structure over to universal, compute power is our new currency. Tokens, compute power is our currency. If we move to that system, it suddenly does become, is it a free market? Does OpenAI have, its own compute system? Does Google have its own compute system, and their currencies are different values, and depending on how you want to spend them based on, honestly, you start to go down this rabbit hole. You start to think of different things. Different stores are running on different currencies, and based on this, that whatever. But it does bring up the question, who holds the power in that, and who actually is ensuring the well-being and good of everybody. And not that I would necessarily say government does a great job of doing that today, but does this have the potential to kind of completely uproot or overturn our whole even governance structure if we were to move to something like this? Which I think we may start to see if we move in this direction. I think we're going to see the government getting way more heavily involved in the technology companies, because it's going to, and that's to me going to be an indicator that, hey, maybe some of this stuff is starting to move in that direction. But I think that's a question I have is, okay, in theory, great. We have these people talking about we're going to have universal basic compute. Everybody gets a set number of compute power. Who decides that, and who manages that? And how does that actually play out in practice? I think the other thing that I have concerns about is when I hear things like universal basic income or universal basic compute universally, there are often these just utopian promises that everybody just is going to have enough. And one of the things that I see a little bit of smoke screening around the universal basic compute is it's not addressing the real problems that actually result in this: greed, pride, all this other stuff, this selfishness. They don't go away because we move from a currency model of traditional currency to compute power. It doesn't address that problem. You're still going to have the haves and the have-nots. You're still going to have some people who are able to work the system in such a way that they have more compute power than somebody else, and it's not based on anything other than unjust systems or broken systems or corruption, things like that. It doesn't actually fix those problems. And so I would really caution people on this, because I see a lot of these promises starting to come up as people are starting to talk about universal basic compute as though this is the solution. This is the solution to fix world hunger, to fix our broken healthcare system, to fix all these other things. Now, granted, I'll be the first to say my worldview heavily influences this, and I don't think any man-made system will ever solve any problem. But I think as you start to dig into some of these things, it just practically doesn't make sense. If you actually take the time to break this down and go, well, wait a minute, how would moving away from the US dollar to a token system, why would that just inherently ensure that everybody gets enough tokens to live? It doesn't. You might go, well, because it's easier to give out tokens than dollars. No, it's not. It's still a system. Somebody's paying for the power to run the data center. They're still going to have to require some sort of transaction, some economic structure to justify how they do it. It's not going to suddenly move to a utopian, here now, because it's tokens, we're just going to give it out and make sure everybody has it. One, the system just won't work. Two, you're still going to have people who are greedy and don't want to share and want to keep it for themselves and know that if they hold the power, they can wield that power to exploit other people, and they can make people do things based on all that. Doesn't go away just because we change our economic structure. And so I think with this one, because I'm already starting to see some of this stuff trending on social media and things like that, where people are like, this is our solution. If we can get tech to here, we can solve all of our economic, financial problems, because now we'll move over to a tech system based on compute power that's all AI driven, and the AI machines will do everything for us, and we'll all just be happy and live life and have what you need, and you won't need to do anything. And just look back over human history. Look back at how many different economic systems we've had in place, how many different government systems we've had in place, all this stuff. There is no utopian answer out of a man-made system. And just because AI has new machines that would potentially be able to do some of this stuff does not necessarily solve these underlying problems that result in all of these systems, all of these structures ultimately end up being broken and benefiting some vastly more than it benefits others, and leaving some people just completely in the dust with nothing. And I think that's, as an example, we have more food in the world than we have enough food in the world to feed every person. There should not be a hunger problem, yet there is. And we often operate off this idea, well, the problem is our distribution channels. Our problem is there's too much here, there's too much there. If we could just fix that problem, we'll get to it. It's an oversimplification and a belief that, oh, if we just fix the process, everything will happen. And it doesn't acknowledge the corruption, the brokenness of the world that actually also is contributing to it. Could it help? I mean, sure. Might there be some things where, it's more cost effective to do things, and as a result things become more accessible in certain areas? Yeah, and that's where I think the idea of us thinking about how AI can better support us as a society is a really good thing. But I think we need to be really careful that we don't start putting our hope in the machines and AI and think that, boy, if we just get this right, if we just advance this technology to a certain point, suddenly all these problems that we've been experiencing since the dawn of time are going to suddenly vaporize, because they're not. And so I think that's the cautionary tale that I would give to people. But it is interesting to consider the plausibilities and the possibilities of what could happen if we actually completely disrupted our current economic structure. And, if we get to some sort of model like this, it could really disrupt things in a major global way, because it would open the opportunity to have almost a unified economic structure versus the kind of disparate one we have today. But again, it assumes that we just, one OpenAI is the one company that does it and they do it for the whole world type of a thing. It's like, it's not the way our economic structure is set up. So anyway, curious if anybody else has heard about this, put any thought into it. Like I said, my biggest caution to people is, if you think AI is going to solve all of the world's problems, it's not. And that's why I'm constantly encouraging people to say, hey, if you got gaps, if you got things that are broken, focus on fixing those. Don't be waiting for something to come around and fix them for you, because it's not going to happen. So with that, I hope you have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend, and we will see you on the other side.